Hello there, and welcome to the historical wing of the Canterlot Archives. My name is SkyShadow, and I'm one of the royal archivists here. So, how can I help you today? I see. So you're looking to learn more about Equestria's history, are you? Well, you've certainly come to the right place. Were you interested in the celestial or pre-celestial eras? You want to learn about all of them? That's quite a bit of reading. But I think I can start you in the right direction. This is Volume 1 of the Condensed History of Equestria, written by Quill Bottle. It contains an overview of our kingdom's past, from prehistoric times to present. It clearly defines all the different ages and their key events, and is a great starter for anyone interested in Equestrian history. My specialty is in illusion magic, so I can show you some of the book's illustrations in greater detail. Shall we take a look then? The first age of pony evolution is referred to by historians as the Grazing Age. It refers to the era when ponies were just coming into being and awareness. This was long before the written word, or even the concept of hoof-made shelters. Ponies roamed in herds and slowly began to split off into the various tribes they would eventually come to be. The Pegasi developed wings and took to the clouds, while the unicorns retreated into the forests, discovering the secrets of magic. And the earth ponies remained behind, running freely over the open plains they loved. Some of our most ancient and enduring tales come from this era. How long this age lasted is unknown, but its end is marked by an event that would change the future for all of pony kind. The emergence of the Alicorn Kingdom. While the tribes were still in their infancy, they came into contact with these legendary ponies. Taller and stronger than average ponies, they possessed traits of all three tribes. And while we hadn't yet learned to make shelters for ourselves, the Alicorns were a highly advanced society built upon powerful magic. They brought us things like writing, music, and mathematics. They segregated the three tribes, identifying their strengths and teaching them the skills that would one day come to define them. To the Pegasi, they taught weather control. To unicorns, they taught magic. And to earth ponies, they taught agriculture. It was the interference of the Alicorns that single-hoofedly pushed early ponies out of the Grazing Age and into civilization. To our ancestors, the Alicorns seemed like gods, and so they willingly submitted to their rule. However, little is known about the age itself, as almost nothing remains of it. We don't know enough about the Alicorns to know how they reacted to this deification, though it certainly seemed to make ruling easier for them. Archaeological searches have turned up virtually nothing of this long-gone era, outside the murals and epitaphs created by our own ancestors. Even these tell us very little, so there is a great debate among historians about whether the Alicorns were really the wise rulers our legends portray them as. Whatever the case, their impact on early history is undeniable and far-reaching, even into lands far beyond our own. Their influence came to a devastating halt due to a terrible catastrophe known simply as the Cataclysm. All early writings speak of this terrible day, when an enormous discharge of magical energy caused the earth to shake, turning night into day. It was felt even in the farthest reaches of the known world, and when it finally subsided, the Alicorns were gone, without a trace. Only a few scattered relics remained, and the ponies they had ruled were left in utter despair at their disappearance. They now had to rule themselves and create civilization anew. This marked the beginning of what we call the Age of Rebirth. The Cataclysm had different effects on each of the different tribes. The Pegasi, for instance, had always been a singular species, preferring individual freedom rather than attaching themselves to others. But on the day of the event, they cooperated for the first time, amassing their homes into an enormous overcloud and pushing it as far away from the disaster as they could manage. They unintentionally created what is, even today, considered to be the largest storm front ever seen in Equestria. With no other choice, the Pegasi began working together to split the storm apart, splitting into teams with different tasks and breaking off segments to reshape into proper clouds. It was a very long time in doing, lasting several years. But eventually, the Pegasi began to see the merits of unity, and so they started shaping the overcloud into something more. Thus beginning construction on the great cloud city of Hepanopolis. The Pegasi took very quickly to their new, united way of living. Team leaders of the original weather units would occasionally meet and prioritize what needed to be done. This is what would eventually become the Cloud Senate. At the same time, the new nation had to defend itself from invaders. Griffins and hippogriffs occupied the skies where they'd moved to. Small battalions of soldiers would protect their borders and conduct occasional food raids down below. Eventually, they were merged into an enormous army called the Pegasus Legions, under the control of a Senate-approved general. Unfortunately, the Senate's power would diminish under increasing military dominance. Rather than just defense, the Legions started looking towards expansion, engaging in many wars to dominate more airspace. However, even with their numerous battles over the centuries, the Pegasus tribe can still be argued to have suffered the least following the Cataclysm, as demonstrated by the ruins of Hepanopolis, which remain standing and intact even until this day. The unicorns, however, took the brunt of the loss. Much of their early magic had been taught to them by alicorns, and so unicorns had near worshipped them. But instead of coming together in the sudden absence of their masters, their society crumbled. They divided into bloodlines, each ruling their own territory. There were numerous disputes and feuds, and some families and their unique magics were lost forever. There was, however, one thing that unified them, a duty they considered sacred, and for which they would devote the most talented magicians of their lines. After the Alicorn Kingdom vanished, the sun and moon were thrown out of cycle. The unicorns took it that without the alicorns to control them, they would continue to rise and set erratically, sometimes even appearing in the sky together. A cult of talented unicorn magicians took it upon themselves to correct this, creating the spells that are used by the princesses, even to this day. They were called the Order of the Horn, and they were appointed foals from all the unicorn families to carry out their duty. They also took in survivors from those unfortunate bloodlines that were lost in the wars, and it was from orphans such as these that the unicorn's greatest king and hero would emerge. Alloy was an orphan raised by the Order, unbound to any known bloodline, while the Order itself was made up of noble children. They'd all watched as their families tore each other apart, while they worked in unison to control the sun and moon. It was young Alloy who eventually convinced the Order of its own power and united them as a force to put an end to the feuds. It was Alloy who turned the magicians of the Order into knights, united for peace and equality among all unicorns. The noble families were no match against the might of the Order's immense magical power, and so the Unicorns' War at last came to an end. Alloy was appointed as king and became the first monarch of the Metal Dynasty, which would reign for 11 generations. As for the Earth Ponies, they also fell on hard times after the Cataclysm. But unlike the Pegasi, who were new to the concept of working together, or the unicorns who were divided by the tragedy, the Earth Ponies had learned the value of unity long ago. The Alicorns had brought them culture, civilization, and agriculture, improving their quality of life immensely. But their loss impacted the Earth Ponies' way of living very little. What affected them most was not the Alicorns' disappearance, but the catastrophic effects left on the Earth itself. The Cataclysm had changed the land. Ancient rivers dried, forests became deserts, and crops were washed away in floods. There was famine and tragedy, and the sky itself seemed to have gone mad. But the Earth Ponies endured. Their bond with the land was strong and taught them what they needed to heal the scars of disaster. Until once again, their crops grew in abundance. By the time King Alloy had come to power, the Earth Ponies' gentle care had restored most of the land. However, they were quickly faced with another problem: raiders. Primarily, it was the Pegasus Legions attacking the Earth Pony farms, but there were also the occasional war parties from the Northern Griffins and Hippogriffs. Even monsters would venture out of their lairs for a chance at their precious harvest. Assaulted from all sides, even the valiant and hardy Earth Ponies were pushed to the point of desperation. Having nowhere else to turn, they appealed to the unicorns for aid. King Alloy agreed, taking the Earth Pony lands as protectorates and effectively bringing them under unicorn rule. This agreement remained amiable for at least a few generations, but as unicorn arrogance took over, the Earth ponies were eventually reduced to the level of serfs, and enmity towards their unicorn protectors fostered. This led into the Age of Strife and the Three-Way War. After years of building up their forces, the Pegasus Legions launched a massive campaign of dominance. They were led by the brilliant military leader, King Thunder the Great, attacking and overrunning the Griffin Kingdom to the north, as well as hitting early Saddle Arabia. Surging with confidence from his early victories, King Thunder made a direct assault at the Unicorn Kingdom and its protectorates. He focused his efforts towards the Earth Ponies, intent on controlling the crops and forcing the unicorns to surrender out of starvation. To counter, the unicorns developed a new type of magic in the use of keystones, magically endowed gems and statues placed in key locations to create independent spell circles. These keystones were capable of casting protective barriers over the fields without a unicorn to activate them. They could also be customized to allow only specific ponies through the shields, the perfect defense against the Pegasus Legions. But this new innovation also allowed for rebellion. It was one particular stallion by the name of Dapper Do who approached the unicorns with the idea of adjusting the shield so only Earth ponies were allowed through. He flattered them by saying how such splendid nobles shouldn't dirty themselves on a lowly farm, and presented himself with a fool's countenance, enforced by his cheerful smile and wall-eyed stare. The unicorns were so convinced of his pretended stupidity that they easily agreed, never realizing that in doing so, they were effectively keeping themselves out of the Earth Pony lands as well. And so the Earth Ponies rose in revolt against their unicorn lords, protected from them by the same magic they'd created. And while the unicorns could take down the keystone barriers, that took effort and horsepower they couldn't spare without weakening their defenses against the legions. What's more, tearing down the protective spells would endanger the harvest, which all three tribes depended on. It was a perfect stalemate on all fronts, and the beginning of a war that would last several decades. That's where Volume 1 concludes. The series totals 7 volumes in all, and it's rumored that the author is working on an 8th, focusing on modern Equestria. Of all the books the Archives offers on Equestrian history, this particular series best reviews the total of Equestria's past, but the condensed history of Equestria only brushes over major events in history. For more exact details, you'll want to look for books dedicated to those periods. Alright then, I just need to see your library card for checkout. What? You don't have one? Well, that'll never do. Just give me a moment, alright? There you are. Now you can check out books from the Canterlot Archives. I hope to see you again in the historical section.
How do you get in here? I don't have any appointments today. I told Pinky not to hop between walls so much. It leaves openings. All right, come on. Let's get you back. This portion's supposed to be off limits. Don't worry about it. You won't remember this when you get home anyways. Bye.